So planning for exam performance and aiming for A star. We've mostly been concentrating chiefly on Handmaid's Tale here, but this is probably the stage at which I do really need to start airing back to my prior experience and thinking chiefly about the Edexcel course's comparison between Handmaids and Frankenstein. These may vary according to your exam board, but the core principles remain the same. Assessment Objective 1. Articulate informed, personal and creative responses to literary texts using associated concepts and terminology and coherent, accurate written expression. Terminology is awarded. Don't just shoehorn it in and feature spot it. Make sure that it's economically creating a clear, concise argument. You are being selective, not simply throwing in all of your knowledge. You've got to select what's relevant to your argument. That's the skill set that's being got at here. Your articulation. Assessment Objective 2 should be the bread and butter that you're more familiar with from GCSE, analysing ways in which meanings are shaped in literary texts. Assessment Objective 3, demonstrating and understanding the significance of and influence of the contexts in which literary texts are written and received. So when it comes to your use of context, you cannot just bolt on your knowledge of something historic at the time. It has got to be engaging and integrating closely with the language analysis of meaning. Contexts, however, something that is often missed here, that you don't absolutely have to do if you've done one or the other, but can be useful to you, is that they can be contexts of reception as well as conception. So that means that even though critical opinions aren't examined in this unit, because Assessment Objective 5 is exploring literary texts informed by different interpretations, that's not examined here. That only comes up in your Shakespeare exam and coursework. However, if you want to bring a critic's opinion in and cite it as a context of reception, an A-star answer might well use them and be credited as a form of context. I am a little bit reticent and wary about that. You've got to do it well. An examiner is going to need to be experienced to recognise that as being an AO3 point. I would try to signpost it clearly for them. Assessment Objective 4, at the bottom of this list, exploring connections across the texts. Now, I want you to think about reordering these, because I actually think that your starting point obviously is your question, whatever theme comes up in the exam question. But it is that theme that will render your argument about the connections between the two novels. So treat the theme in the question and AO4 as your starting point. And according to that theme, you will bring in your AO1 and 2 argument, whilst analytically integrating your AO3 socio-historic contexts of writing, chiefly, unless you drop on really well to a context of reception for something that can be awarded as AO3 despite being sort of AO5. Take care with that. In Pearson Edexcel's course, Frankenstein and Handmaids are under this heading of Science and Society. Might not be the case with your exam board. You may or may not have to explicitly refer to that theme. It's only as and when it's required by the question. So it's a case of using your common sense and being selective. This is A level, it's not GCSE. The themes group the text and consider whether it's a central part of your answer or marginal, or it might not be necessary. Remember, early on in the course I listed a whole series of subdivisions of those themes, and I will be coming to the point where I want you to actually use those themes to plan and anticipate potential exam questions. Assessment Objective 1. How effectively do you express your ideas? Don't shoehorn in terminology just to feature spot, but it can really improve the economy and clarity of your expression if it's done right. This is about the quality and structure of your argument, the legibility, I don't mean handwriting, of course that's important, of your ideas, with conclusions. That's a very common problem in this very short exam. This exam is only an hour and 15 minutes. Originally, it was conceived as being 1 hour. When I started teaching this course in 2016 and 2017, my first class sat the full A level in 2018, and my second class for it sat the full A level in 2019. Between those 2 years, it changed from 60 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes in a response, I think, to teachers petitioning for that. If I'm really honest, I still don't think an hour and a quarter is particularly fair for comparing 2 novels. I have experimented with a class in the past with giving them a full 2 hours or an hour and 3/4, and I didn't tell them, but I speculated beforehand that that would result in about a grades improvement, and I was proven right. Nevertheless, unfortunately, it's not what we've got. So, if you get to a point where you've made, say, your 3rd or 4th idea, however many ideas it may be, and you know that you are running out of time, and you've got a choice between carrying on with that point that's really good and you're enjoying it, or making the painful decision to stop, leave a gap, and write your conclusion, you do the latter. Do not run out of time and not write a conclusion. If you have to forego the point that you were making, however in love you are with its excellence, or however confident you are that it's useful and important, you've got to skip it and conclude. Leave a gap, and if you get time, go back. I'll show you an example of that next episode. Effective use of examples from texts, not just quotations. Yes, do some quoting, but you've got to use them to broadly present patterns and thematic ideas in an exam where you haven't got a lot of time. You are not at GCSE level and you are not doing PEE, however good a structure and scaffold that once was. How far are you writing in connection between the 2 texts? This is where AO4 marries up to AO1, because those links should be driving your argument. In relation to ideas for the set question, don't let there be an imbalance between your 2 novels. You need to treat them evenly. Objective 2. Language, form and structure. The old triad of close analysis is fine, but you've got to go further. Consider how far close language analysis of specific examples is useful when you're discussing whole novels. You've got to take this broader pattern approach of themes and argument. Consider other ways in which meanings are shaped within texts, especially a text like Handmaid's, where you get a cultural reference and then you've got to flip back to an earlier part of the novel and you've got to make a link. That's what I was trying to demonstrate for you in the last episode when I was saying that you could talk about the sexual encounter with Nick and link it to the palimpsest image at the beginning and link it to the historic notes. What ways are meanings shaped across a whole novel? It is a very postmodern novel that makes allusions and links to popular culture to help you infer meaning. So you've got to see how those meanings emerge from contextual issues. What voices, symbolism, openings, endings, overall structure, and the links to social context make for that analysis. And I've got to be frank with you, many A-level students don't do that. Too many students don't do Assessment Objective 3 well. You are not bolting on or squeezing in or shoehorning in a bit of social and historical knowledge that has come out of what you've been taught. You can do that relevantly and it's still only a squeeze in. Engage it with the analysis and argument. Don't think about the texts in isolation. Think about comparing the both of them together, because otherwise that leads to meaningless bolt-on context. How do the contexts relate to the themes and the question? I know I've sort of spoon-fed you some ideas for Handmaids. You need to be very careful about how you then signpost its relevance to the theme of your question. I've chosen them because they're broadly about the overarching theme of oppression, so they should work broadly, but you must be answering the question and the theme in the question. Take care that you signpost to your examiner the relevance of that. My 2019 students got a wonderful question that superbly fitted the way that I'd taught the novel. One of them gave a brilliant answer, but because it was a question that she felt so prepared for, that little bit of signposting led to a lower grade than I thought it deserved. We might take a look at that as an example. Which contexts from AO3 connect the texts, the themes, and make for the argument? Don't be frightened to include relevant reception of texts by critics, contemporary views of Shelley's novel, abortion campaigners now using the Handmaid's concept of oppression, if it's relevant. For Objective 4 connections, I want you to start with themes for general revision. Teachers may have asked you in the past to write your own exam questions, come up with your own exam questions. That's a really good thing to do, and we'll do that from the themes shortly or next episode. Start with the themes as your general revision starting point. Use themes to drive your assessment objective for connections between the two texts, because that is part of your core AO1 argument. That then informs what you are choosing from close analysis of quotations, how language shapes meaning for AO2. Use banks of key quotations that you have mapped out, I like flowcharts, by themes, and then make your links to your AO3 contexts. Or some of those links might already have happened earlier to drive the comparison of the two novels. It depends what you get. Context has got to be analytical and thematic and linked to your reading of the novels. It's not just bolt-on historic knowledge. I know I am labouring that, but I really want to inculcate that in your mind. So it actually won't be until the next episode that we look at some past questions. But in the meantime, think about using themes to create your own questions. If you are a different exam board, you are probably still doing a comparative question, but you could think about this just for Handmaids or for both novels that you're studying. I've geared this for Frankenstein alongside Handmaids. Create your own comparative questions by thinking of any and all possible themes. That will help you anticipate possible exam questions. Not only does thinking about themes help you build possible questions, but it also helps you think about selecting and planning key quotations that cover several themes at once, so that you are able to demonstrate your close analysis skills and inference and deduction from connotations of language choices. So, survival, language and power. How do both of your novels explore the theme of language and power? For example, how do both of your novels convey concepts of survival? How do both of the writers show manipulation, communication and isolation? How do both novels compare how both of the writers convey the misuse of science, relate to relevant contexts? Gender, fertility, distorted relationships, social power and control, class and hierarchy. Hope. How do both of your chosen texts convey concepts of hope? Love, surveillance, society, fear and anxiety, companionship, freedom, threat, transgression of moral boundaries, trust and betrayal, oppression, humanity, duality. Some of these strike me as less likely. I'm stretching it a bit there. Witnessing and retelling. I think that would be tough. The palimpsest idea in reconstruction is never going to happen as an actual question, of course. But it's useful analysis for other themes. Conformity and individuality. Concealment. Collusion and resistance, victims of adversity. I was a bit shocked a couple of years ago when a class of mine that I gave victims of adversity all simultaneously raised their hands to inquire what adversity meant, being victims of some sort of bad consequence or bad circumstance. The environment, nostalgia, judgment by appearance. Perhaps that's more of a niche specific creature and Frankenstein thing. Nature versus nurture doesn't strike me as a potential question. Benevolence and malevolence, hamartia, excessive pride, rejection. Not all of them, of course, are viable for an exam question, but it's a really useful tool for planning and preparation. If you are savvy about the contextual links that you choose, they can be used to tee up efficient close analysis within the time limit. In Handmaids, find symbolism to analyse where it's relevant to the theme and argument you're making. Forget about basic socio-historic links that every A-level student blurts. Forget about galvanism in Frankenstein. Everybody's going to talk about it. Frankenstein's context, I think, would be more meaningfully useful to you in terms of literary movements or intertextual links rather than merely history. So if we're going to link context analytically for Frankenstein, the Enlightenment as an aspect of socio-historic context, science and rationalism as an aspect of literary or genre-based context, romanticism and the Miltonic, Milton, nature and the sublime. Victor as the Byronic hero. Can you remember a definition of the Byronic hero? A hero who means well, who has good intent, but negative character traits along the way. Think Sherlock Holmes. Prometheus, transgressing divine boundaries. Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus is the full title. Might we link to the biblical Genesis epigraph of the Handmaid's Tale? Paradise Lost? Types of doppelganger? Intertextual links are going to give you an AO3 that's really analytically useful in this novel, such as Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The doppelganger haunts Coleridge's poem. Can we link that to Handmaids? Like one on that lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, and having turned round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. The Creature. Shelley alludes to the poem very early on in Frankenstein. In Letter 2, Walton states, "I am going to unexplored regions, to the land of mist and snow, but I shall kill no albatross. Therefore do not be alarmed for my safety, or if I should come back to you as worn and woeful as the ancient mariner. You will smile at my allusion, but I will disclose a secret. I have often attributed my attachment to, my passionate enthusiasm for, the dangerous mysteries of the ocean to that production of the most imaginative of modern poets." The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is believed to have influenced the structure and themes of Frankenstein, as Victor Frankenstein's narrative is presented as a warning to Walton against the dangers of the activities of the overreacher, somebody guilty of hamartia, excessive ambition, in seeking forbidden knowledge, playing God. It also deals with a journey to an extreme polar region, isolation, and a man committing a thoughtless act that impacts on others and the supernatural. The epigraph to Frankenstein reads, "Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay to mould me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me?" It could easily be the creature, but it's actually Adam from Milton's Paradise Lost. The idea of duality is a recurrent theme in Gothic literature, echoing the perceived division between good and evil. In Judeo-Christian faiths, Satan was the fallen angel. Once at God's right hand, he was expelled from the kingdom of heaven. Think about appearance and reality, good and evil, life and death, male and female being some of the dualisms that mark the Gothic text, Paradise Lost, and Frankenstein. The creature is Frankenstein's first creation, like Adam, lonely and in need of a companion. He commits acts of sin against his creator, has to make sense of a totally new world, and is banished, figuratively, from Eden out of the paradise of a family. Frankenstein also commits an act of sin against God and is banished from a happy relationship and the rest of mankind. Both the creature and Frankenstein play God, usurp the role of God, particularly Frankenstein, in creating the creature in the first place. Later, when the roles are reversed, the creature reminds Frankenstein, "I am your master," and controls his life. He takes on this duality with Lucifer. The creature rebels against his creator. Like Lucifer, he seeks revenge by destroying the thing his creator loves most. Frankenstein also rebels against God by creating the creature. But Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it as I had read the other volumes which had fallen into my hands, as a true story. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred to the several situations, as the similarity struck me, to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence. But his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the special care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature. But I am and was wretched and alone. Many times I considered Satan the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. No Eve soothed my sorrows, nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator. But where was mine? He had abandoned me. So within Frankenstein, what are the purposes of the narrative levels? Is Walton's meta-diegetic narrative layer supposed to lend us an external objectivity that we can have greater trust in than that of Victor Frankenstein, who sets out with benevolent intentions but doesn't seem self-aware of his moral wrongdoing or lack of nurturing parenting care? Do we then compare his intradiegetic narrative layer with the extradiegetic central core narrative of the creature and consider him unreliable or judge him? As another point of revision, can you still define the sublime? We are not talking here in terms of the capital R romantic concept of the sublime about mere natural beauty in the world. This is something that one experiences alone in awe of an overwhelming part of nature that makes one feel very small and potentially fearful terror at the power of nature compared to one small human. Sublime experiences, whether in nature or art, inspire awe and reverence, and an emotional understanding that transcends rational thoughts or language. For romantics, the sublime is a meeting of the emotional, subjective internal, and the natural world, the objective external. We allow our emotions to overwhelm our rationality as we experience the wonder of creation. The enlightened scientist rationally observes the natural world, isolating and shutting off his emotions and biases to understand objective, quantifiable truths in the form of facts. The romantic participates, conversely, emotionally and imaginatively in the natural world, actively breaking down the very same walls so carefully constructed by the Enlightenment. Because the sublime is emotional, it's traditionally considered something that one must experience alone. Note how Frankenstein finds peace either walking in the mountains or sailing alone. The sublime is ineffable. It's not tangibly quantifiable. One can't really express it in words or language as much as feel it. It is important not to confuse the sublime with simple beauty. Romantics are interested in natural experiences that utterly consume us, perhaps moving us to tears and giving us a humbling sense of the wonder and majesty of the natural world. It's initially associated with the thrill of mountain summits in early Wordsworth poetry, mountains being the topographical core of the romantic sublime. Romantic writers often focus on the notion that certain aspects of the sublime, grandeur of thought together with intensity of passion, are dependent upon an ability of soul or character. Not everybody can experience the sublime. This might be a good opportunity to link genre context with close analysis of Victor Frankenstein himself. He is a member of the split between these two things. He's a scientist. He might be straying into the world of the Enlightenment, but he rejects that clarity for the pleasurable and terrifying sense that all can't be known about a particular landscape. The romantic repudiation of the picturesque as middle class in favour of the grand sublime. Socio-historic and literary contexts, then. Rationalism versus romanticism. It seems that all major movements in literature are rejections of something that came before, and I think that's very much the case with romanticism. Romanticism rejects classical values, and Frankenstein shows a conflict between the two. Classicism, or rationalism, came out of the Enlightenment period, which valued reason, using one's brain, as the primary basis of authority. The reason it's called classical is that the writers tended to emulate the rational philosophers of ancient Greece. Romanticism celebrates the natural world and rejects reducing it to scientific fact. It celebrates the power, the intangible in nature. So I appreciate that's quite an overload of contextual information, but use all of that to formulate a rationale for your bank of key quotations. It is open book, but you haven't got time. You've got an hour and a quarter, so you've got to virtually memorise ones that overlap core themes and sophisticated contextual links. I really do think that genre and intertextual links is the way to go for Frankenstein in terms of AO3. When you look at core themes and close analysis in The Handmaid's Tale, it's more likely that context is going to come from the historic precedents that inspired Atwood. Briefly then, even though you'll be sick of me, Puritan America, the Salem Witch Trials. The dedications to Mary Webster, accused of witchcraft, and Perry Miller, professor of Puritan literature, or the Puritan period, excuse me. The genre of dystopia, influences of the likes of 1984. The Christian right under, Ronald Reagan in 80s America. Feminism in the 60s and 70s. Second wave feminism in the 80s. Nuclear disaster, slavery, the rise of Islamic fundamentalist states, police states such as East Germany, the rise of Hitler. You'll be sick of me, I know, but I don't care. One of the tasks that I set myself, says Atwood, when writing the novel, was to avoid including any practices which had not already happened somewhere at some time. One of the functions of the historic notes is to indicate the origins of some of the practices described in the novel. It's vital to understand that every single one of the practices described is drawn from the historic record. What I haven't said in the last couple of episodes, just to make that link, is that whilst I've talked about that being about recognising one's past and not allowing historic atrocities to be written over by a palimpsest and repeated, we could talk about her purpose being allegorical or didactic, designed to teach a moral lesson. An American Revolution having to claim God to be on its side, environmental concerns, fertility, etc. You can't for a moment include all of these things in an hour and 15 minutes. So you've got to think about bits of analysis to use historical contextual parallels that are thematically juicy. Tattoos and the Holocaust, for example, is great, but think about how you're going to link it into thematic arguments. Offred's quickly erased memory of a documentary on an SS mistress is a bit like a palimpsest she can't remember from childhood. The therapy of recalling origins of words, Mayday, Mayday, help me, the very particular Jewish ship, etc. The reference to the mistress being Calder, who had an affair with Gert, commandant of a concentration camp, remained loyal until death, and yet, after a 1983 interview describing him as charming and not regretting anything, committing suicide the day afterwards. Why does Atwood include such a reference, and what does it mirror in the novel? That's a repetition of the questions I asked a couple of episodes ago. But how can you link contexts of that sort to thematic analysis relating to what it means to be human? Offred states that she was thinking about how not to think. How does that mirror her way of dealing with situations? The reference to Gert and his mistress claims he wasn't a monster. Offred seems to be softening to the commander, perhaps too much. The purple placards on gender traitors, paralleling the pink armbands of gay victims of the Holocaust. Puritan Massachusetts, witch trials, the red A of the Scarlet Letter taken as inspiration. They could convert or emigrate to Israel. A lot of them emigrated, if you can believe the news. I saw a boatload of them on the TV, leaning over the railings in their black coats and hats and long beards, trying to look as Jewish as possible, in costumes fished up from the past, women with shawls over their heads, smiling and waving, a little stiffly, it's true, as if they were posing to get out of Gilead as refugees, where in the roundups of the 40s and 30s they would have hidden Judaism. It's an ironic opposite of the roundups. The very precise reference to the SS St. Louis. I hope I'm inculcating with this kind of repetition slavery. The handmaids are referred to by their patronymic. They're separated from families, tattooed. The Underground Female Road directly alludes to the Underground Railroad that took slaves from safe house to freedom in Canada. The cattle prods allude to the American Civil Rights Movement, another black segregation issue. Concerns about toxic pollution. The historical notes make a mockery of Caucasian groups studying ethnic groups by inverting that. This is a really important slide. I want to emphasise that whilst I have given so many examples there of context opportunities, you mustn't shoehorn that in without signposting to the examiner its relevance to the question. I had a student who used all of those brilliantly in a question about warnings about the future, but without a few sentences to signpost it, its excellence wasn't spotted. I don't think that was that candidate's fault. I think it was badly mismarked, and we can have a bit of a look at that in future. But do signpost for your examiner who's tired, who has done 600 papers that day, who might have started a glass of wine, that they are seeing a pertinent answer to the question. Be flexible, use common sense, pick appropriate material and reject confidently what isn't relevant. Return to the wording of the question and make clear that your context and thematic analysis link back to the question. I seem to come to AO4 late because it's number 4. Maybe I should start with it. I definitely think you should start with it. The linking of the novels, according to the theme you're given in the question, is the driver of your argument. The pseudo-historical, documentary, epistolary styles of the two novels. There's a mouthful. They're both epistolary. We start with Walton's letters. We move on to Frankenstein. We move on to The Creature. All of it figuratively, fictively recounted by Walton. Handmaid's reads like a diary because it's a transcription of tapes. This pseudo-historic document Atwood fakes that it's actually a transcription of the tapes by P.X. Soto. So they both fake documents within a fictional novel. That's a point of broad comparison. The narrative techniques, the technical aspects that are specific to prose, that's not something that you would see cropping up in a poem or a play. Although sometimes we have a narrator in a play, don't we? The voices, are they retrospective, analepsis, distant, or recent past? Are they introspective, confessional, subversive, resigned to their fate, rebelling, ironic, uncertain, intense? Think about the type of voice being presented. Other links between the two novels. The concept of defining what it means to be human. The manipulation of reproduction. The fact that in both we get first-person partial knowledge whereby we as readers feel uncertain. Knowledge versus ignorance. Control versus isolation. Love and the subversion of relationships. Speculative worlds that are near our own through the science fiction element. Oppressed individuals. language as a tool of power or absence of it as a tool of lack thereof. Just for a break and a bit of mental exercise for you not to be too passive, I know I've said it before, but critique this cover in terms of Handmaid's themes. Can you link themes with its faceless design? The impressionistic style and lack of face or half face, creating this notion of an oppressive regime erasing individuality. If you can't define palimpsest by now, then my work will never be done. Define and thematically explain how that image works on page 1 and anticipates the twist at the end, and is signposted in a couple of more explicit ways along the way with the concept of reconstructing and retelling her story. Analyse how the historical notes and the epistolary style convey themes about historic mistakes repeating themselves and allowing for oppression. How do you know what the truth is as a concept? And couldn't there be several? The palimpsest as a metaphor for repurposing the gym by the regime also foreshadows the revelation of the transcription as a palimpsest of Offred's journal, reordered by Peixoto. Just as Offred acknowledges her story is limping and mutilated because she's aware of either misremembering or often recasting deliberately of events, which she's totally honest about, it also foreshadows Peixoto's derogatory dismissal of her reliability, and his potential dissection or reordering perhaps parallels the diegetic layers of Frankenstein, whereby we judge and compare Victor Frankenstein's reliability against the testimony of the creature and vice versa. Make thematic links to a limping and mutilated narrative, the palimpsest, the historian's interference in an individual's story. I've already asked you to do this for the analysis in the last episode, but if you've not done so, here we are again. Examine Peixoto in the historic notes. How is he presented? What are his main concerns in examining the transcripts of Offred's tapes? What do you detect about Atwood's attitude to him? What is his tone? What is his function in the novel? In what ways has society changed since the fictional era of Gilead? What lessons have been learned and what haven't? Objective 5 is not part of the prose paper, but it doesn't stop an A-star bringing it in for a sophisticated form of contexts of reception if it's relevant to your thematic argument and analysis. Mella suggests that from a feminist viewpoint, Frankenstein is about what happens when a man tries to have a baby without a woman. Points of comparison with Handmaids? Frankenstein's profoundly concerned with natural as opposed to unnatural modes of reproduction. His failure as a parent in the novel has been read as an expression of the anxieties which accompany pregnancy, birth, and maternity. What parallels might you take with Atwood's novel? My final point today, then, is that this exam is hard. It asks you to link two things that when I first started teaching it, I thought, crikey, how on earth do these two things link? And then more and more occurred to me as I went about it. Link themes revision to key quotations that overlap multiple themes. Build a bank of them, and they're your go-to bank for the exam. That will also help you build questions, because you need to be anticipating possible questions, which is what we will come to at the beginning of the next episode. I really hope this has been helpful. Please ask any questions or any other remarks that you want in the comments below. Please hit like, please subscribe, please hit the bell for notifications of this and further episodes on other literary texts or films.